Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Clockmaker Who Predicted Murder. Chapter 1. The Man Who Knew Tomorrow. It is with some hesitation that I commit the particulars of this remarkable affair to paper, for among the many strange adventures which I shared with my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, few possessed so singular and unsettling a character as the case of the clockmaker who appeared capable of foretelling death itself. The public, I may add, never learned the full truth. Certain facts were suppressed at the request of influential persons, while others were deemed too extraordinary for general circulation. Even now, years after the events occurred, I can scarcely revisit the memory without recalling the peculiar chill that settled over Baker Street during those winter days. The matter began on a fog-bound evening in November of 1894. London lay buried beneath one of those yellow mists which transform familiar streets into shadowy corridors. The lamps glowed dimly behind curtains of vapour, and the sound of passing carriages emerged only as distant murmurs, before fading once more into silence. Holmes and I had spent the greater part of the afternoon in our sitting room at 221B Baker Street. My companion lounged upon the sofa, his long fingers pressed together beneath his chin. A monograph concerning ancient methods of cipher construction lay open upon his knee, though I doubted whether he had turned a page during the previous hour. I sat near the fire, with a medical journal. Neither of us spoke. Such silences were common between us, and never uncomfortable. Suddenly Holmes lifted his head. "Our visitor is late." I glanced toward the clock. "Are we expecting someone?" He smiled faintly. "We are now." "You surprise me." "Not at all." "Then perhaps you will explain." "The matter is elementary." He rose and crossed toward the window. "Observe the pavement opposite." I joined him. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed a figure standing motionless beside a gas lamp. The man appeared uncertain whether to cross the street. Twice he stepped forward, twice he retreated. "He has been there for 7 minutes," said Holmes. "You timed him?" "No." "Then how do you know?" "The cigar ash upon the sill marks the duration." I shook my head. Holmes continued. "He wishes to consult me. He is unfamiliar with Baker Street. His clothing is respectable, yet he hesitates from anxiety rather than poverty. Furthermore, he carries an object wrapped in cloth beneath his arm." The stranger finally crossed the road. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson's footsteps sounded upon the stairs. A knock followed. "Come in," said Holmes. The door opened. The newcomer was a man of perhaps 60 years. His face was thin and deeply lined. Steel-grey whiskers framed a mouth whose corners seemed permanently drawn downward. He wore a dark overcoat buttoned to the throat. Under one arm rested a rectangular parcel wrapped carefully in black fabric. What struck me most, however, were his eyes. They possessed the strained expression of a man who had witnessed something he could neither understand nor forget. Mrs. Hudson withdrew. The visitor remained standing. "You are Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked. "I am." "And Dr. Watson?" "At your service." The stranger inclined his head. "My name is Elias Finch." Holmes gestured toward a chair. "Please sit, Mr. Finch." The man obeyed. For several moments he seemed unable to speak. Holmes studied him quietly. "You are a clockmaker," the visitor started. "Good heavens! You maintain a workshop in Clerkenwell?" "Yes." "You have not slept properly for at least 3 nights." Finch stared. "How can you know such things?" "The brass filings upon your cuffs, the oil stains beneath your fingernails, the dark discoloration beneath the eyes. These are not mysteries." A faint smile crossed the old man's face. "I was told you were remarkable, Mr. Holmes. I am occasionally useful. Now tell us why you have come." The clockmaker swallowed. His fingers tightened upon the wrapped parcel. "What I am about to relate may sound absurd." Holmes settled back. "Excellent. Absurdity is often preferable to banality." Finch drew a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, a gentleman entered my shop. His name, I did not know it then. And now, I know it only because I read it later in the newspapers. Holmes nodded. Proceed. The man carried a pocket watch, unlike any I had ever seen. At this, he carefully placed the parcel upon the table. His hands trembled. I am a craftsman, gentlemen. I have repaired thousands of timepieces. Yet this watch, he hesitated. It disturbed me. Why? I asked. The clockmaker slowly unwrapped the black cloth. Inside lay an old silver pocket watch. The object appeared ordinary enough at first glance. Its casing was tarnished, its chain worn. Yet the room seemed strangely still as Finch opened the cover. I leaned forward. The dial contained no maker's name, no serial number, only a ring of black numerals, and beneath the hands was engraved a single sentence. Time remembers all things. Holmes reached for the watch. His eyes narrowed. Interesting. You notice it? Asked Finch. Several peculiarities. The clockmaker nodded eagerly. Exactly. What did the owner request? A routine repair. And? I examined the mechanism. Finch's voice dropped. What I found should have been impossible. Holmes remained silent. The watch contained an additional wheel. A modification? No. Then what? I do not know. Finch licked his lips. I have spent 40 years studying clockwork, yet I cannot explain its purpose. Holmes turned the watch over in his hand. The gentleman left it with you? Yes. And returned later? The old man closed his eyes. No. Why not? Finch looked toward the fire. For several seconds the only sound was the crackling of the flames. Then he spoke. Because the next morning he was murdered. A heavy silence settled upon the room. I felt Holmes become suddenly attentive. The newspapers identified him? He asked. Yes. Who was he? Sir Adrian Mowbray. The name was familiar. A wealthy industrialist. A figure of some prominence in financial circles. His violent death had indeed occupied the headlines only weeks earlier. Holmes set down the watch. Continue. Finch's face had grown pale. The murder itself is not why I came. No? The old man slowly shook his head, his gaze fixed upon the watch. What frightened me was what happened before it. For the first time, I observed genuine unease upon Holmes's features. Explain. The clockmaker swallowed. When I opened the mechanism, I found a folded strip of paper hidden inside. A note? Yes. What did it say? Finch looked from Holmes to me. His voice became scarcely more than a whisper. It contained a date. And the date was the following day. Holmes remained perfectly still. The day Sir Adrian Mowbray died. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. Surely a coincidence, I said. I thought so as well, replied Finch. But there was more. The old man reached into his coat pocket. He produced a small envelope. I discovered another message yesterday. Holmes accepted it. The clockmaker's expression had become almost desperate. That is why I am here, Mr. Holmes. Holmes opened the envelope. His eyes moved across the contents. For the first time that evening, I saw genuine surprise flash across his face. What is it? I demanded. Holmes handed me the paper. Upon it was written a single sentence, in neat black ink. A murder will occur at midnight on November 21st. I glanced toward the mantel clock. The date was November 20th, and scarcely 6 hours remained until midnight. Across the room, Elias Finch whispered the words that would begin one of the most bewildering investigations of Sherlock Holmes's career. Can a clock predict death, Mr. Holmes? And for once my friend did not answer immediately. Chapter 2. Midnight Strikes. For several moments after reading the strange message, neither Holmes nor I spoke. The silence in Baker Street seemed to deepen until even the ticking of the mantel clock became unnaturally loud. A murder will occur at midnight on November 21st. The words were simple enough. Yet they possessed a curious power over the imagination. I found myself glancing instinctively toward the window, where London's fog pressed against the glass like some living thing seeking entrance. Holmes took the paper from my hand and examined it beneath the lamp. Interesting. His tone was calm, but I knew him well enough to detect genuine interest. Elias Finch leaned forward. You believe me now? I believe, said Holmes, that you discovered this note exactly as you claim. The clockmaker appeared relieved. Then you understand my concern. I understand it perfectly. Holmes lifted the silver watch. However, understanding concern is not the same as accepting conclusions. You think it is a trick. I think everything is a trick, until evidence proves otherwise. The old craftsman frowned. But Sir Adrian Mowbray truly died on the date mentioned in the first message. Indeed. Holmes turned the watch slowly between his fingers. And that fact is what makes this object worthy of examination. He rose abruptly. Watson. Yes? Kindly fetch my lens. I retrieved the magnifying glass from the chemical table. Holmes immediately began inspecting every inch of the timepiece. For nearly 15 minutes he worked in complete silence. Finch watched anxiously. I watched Holmes. At last my companion smiled. Excellent. What have you found? I asked. Several things. Such as? The watch is older than it appears. Finch nodded. I thought so myself. Yet certain components inside are comparatively modern. You mean it was altered? Repeatedly. Holmes pointed toward the hinge. Observe this microscopic scoring. Neither Finch nor I could see it without the lens. It indicates that the casing has been opened hundreds of times, perhaps for repairs, I suggested. No, Holmes shook his head. A watchmaker opens the rear plate. These marks are concentrated near the hidden compartment. Finch shifted uneasily. The compartment where I found the first note. Precisely. Holmes closed the cover. Someone intended messages to be placed there regularly. The clockmaker's eyes widened. Then you believe the predictions were planted. At present I believe nothing. Holmes walked to the fireplace. The question is not whether the messages existed before the murders. What then? I asked. The question is who knew the murders would occur? A cold sensation touched the back of my neck. Finch looked equally disturbed. You think the writer may be the killer? Possibly. Good Lord. Holmes remained thoughtful. Or perhaps someone close to the killer, or the intended victim. Also possible. The clockmaker shook his head. No, that cannot explain Sir Adrian. Why not? Because the message predicted only a death. And? It did not mention his name. Holmes turned sharply. For the first time, genuine approval appeared in his expression. Very good, Mr. Finch. The old man blinked. I beg your pardon? You have noticed an important detail. Holmes sat once more. The message does not identify a victim. Exactly. Finch leaned forward. It merely predicts that a murder will occur. I considered this. The distinction seemed subtle, yet Holmes clearly regarded it as significant. What difference does that make? I asked. A considerable one. He steepled his fingers. If the message named the victim, we would seek someone possessing specific foreknowledge. And since it does not, we must consider broader possibilities. Before I could inquire further, the bell downstairs rang sharply. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps sounded upon the staircase. Moments later, the door opened. A telegram rested upon a tray. For Mr. Holmes, sir. Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Holmes accepted the envelope. The landlady withdrew. My friend opened the telegram and scanned its contents. Immediately his expression changed. What is it? I asked. Lestrade. Trouble? Apparently, he handed me the message. Come at once. Extraordinary developments regarding Mowbray case. Urgent. Lestrade Finch rose halfway from his chair. The Mowbray murder? It would appear so. Holmes reached for his coat. Watson, your hat. Within minutes we were descending the stairs. The clockmaker followed us. You are taking me with you? Certainly. But why? Holmes buttoned his coat. Because I suspect, Mr. Finch, that before this night ends, your mysterious watch may become considerably more interesting. The journey to Scotland Yard proved slow. The fog had thickened. Street lamps floated like dim orange moons in a sea of yellow haze. By the time our cab arrived, nearly 40 minutes had passed. Inspector Lestrade awaited us inside. His normally composed face showed unmistakable agitation. "Thank heaven you've come." Holmes removed his gloves. "You seem excited." "I am." Lestrade noticed Finch. "Who's this?" "The owner of our present problem." The inspector frowned but asked no further questions. Instead, he led us into his office. A file lay open upon the desk. Several photographs were scattered beside it. Lestrade closed the door. "You remember Mowbray's murder?" "Naturally. A single stab wound in his library." Holmes nodded. The case appeared straightforward. It did. The inspector ran a hand through his hair. "Until this afternoon." "What happened?" Lestrade handed Holmes a document. "We found a witness." "And?" "A very peculiar witness," Holmes read silently. After a moment he raised an eyebrow. "Indeed. What is it?" I asked. Lestrade looked toward me. "A newspaper vendor." "Yes?" "He claims Sir Adrian visited him 2 days before his death." "That seems unremarkable." "Not until you hear what happened." The inspector hesitated. "According to the witness, Mowbray purchased an evening paper, and," he then pointed to a report describing an unrelated murder. Lestrade swallowed. After which he supposedly said, "Interesting. My turn comes Friday." The room became silent. Finch's face drained of colour. "Friday?" "That was the day he died," said Lestrade. The clockmaker gripped the back of a chair. "My God." I looked toward Holmes. His expression had become intensely focused. "You verified the witness. Twice. Reliable?" "Completely." Holmes paced slowly across the room. "Mowbray expected his own murder." "It appears so." "And told no one?" "Apparently not." Holmes stopped. "Anything else?" Lestrade exchanged an uneasy glance with me. "There is one more thing." "What?" The inspector reached into a drawer. He removed a folded sheet of paper. "We found this hidden among Mowbray's personal effects." Holmes unfolded it. The instant he read the contents, his eyes narrowed. Without speaking, he handed the paper to me. I read, "November 14th, Horace Bellamy. November 21st, November 28th. Below the names and dates appeared a rough sketch of a pocket watch. My heart skipped. "Bellamy," I said. Lestrade nodded grimly. "Horace Bellamy was murdered on November 14th. Finch stared in horror. "The first date?" "Exactly." I looked again at the list, then at the final entry. "November 21st, tomorrow. The date from the second hidden message. A murder will occur at midnight on November 21st. Holmes took back the paper. For several seconds he examined it thoughtfully. Then, quite unexpectedly, he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Rather, it was the expression he wore when some hidden pattern had begun to emerge. "You see something?" I asked. "A possibility?" "Only a possibility. For the moment," Lestrade groaned. "There he goes again." Holmes ignored him. Instead, he turned to the clockmaker. "Mr. Finch." "Yes?" "When exactly did you discover the second message?" "This morning." "And nobody else knows?" "No one." "Excellent." Holmes slipped the paper into his pocket. "Then we possess an advantage." "Over whom?" Holmes moved toward the door. "Over the individual who believes tomorrow's crime has not yet attracted attention." Lestrade frowned. "You think another murder is actually planned?" "I would wager my violin upon it." The inspector's face darkened. "Then we must stop it." "Precisely." "And the victim?" Holmes paused. For a brief instant his gaze rested upon the strange silver watch. Then he spoke. "That, Lestrade, is the one detail we do not yet know." Outside, somewhere beyond the fog-covered streets of London, a church bell began striking the hour. 10 o'clock. Only 2 hours remained until midnight. And somewhere in the city, if the prediction were true, a murderer was already preparing to act. Chapter 3. The House of Silent Clocks. The chimes that marked 10 o'clock had scarcely faded when Holmes ushered us from Scotland Yard and into the fog-bound streets. Inspector Lestrade accompanied us, though not without evident irritation. "I still fail to see," he remarked as we entered a waiting cab, "why we are not placing constables throughout the city." "Because London contains nearly 5 million inhabitants," replied Holmes dryly. "A difficult number to protect simultaneously." Lestrade grunted. "We know a murder is planned. We suspect a murder is planned." The distinction seems academic. On the contrary, it is essential. The inspector folded his arms and lapsed into silence. Across from us sat Elias Finch, clutching the mysterious silver watch as though it were a venomous creature liable to spring from his hands. The old clockmaker had spoken little since our departure from Scotland Yard. His eyes remained fixed upon the object. At length Holmes addressed him. "Tell me, Mr. Finch, have you attempted to discover the watch's origin?" "A dozen times." "And?" "I failed." "Why?" Finch hesitated. "Because it should not exist." Holmes smiled faintly. "My favourite category of object." The old man shook his head. "I am serious." "I know. The workmanship belongs to no school I recognise. Swiss? No. French? No. English? Not exactly." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Curious." Finch nodded. "The mechanism combines techniques separated by decades." "How so?" "A wheel fashioned according to methods abandoned before I was born lies beside parts that appear comparatively modern." Lestrade frowned. "Meaning what?" The clockmaker spread his hands helplessly. "It is as though several craftsmen from different generations built it together." The inspector looked unconvinced. Holmes, however, appeared intrigued. "And there is another peculiarity." "What is that?" "The metal. The silver." Finch nodded. "It bears microscopic tool marks unlike any I have encountered." Holmes leaned forward. "Distinctive?" "Very." The old man's voice lowered. "If I encountered them again, I should recognize them instantly." For several moments Holmes gazed through the cab window. I knew that expression. Some idea had begun to take shape in his mind. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "About craftsmen." "Indeed." "Yes." He tapped the watch. "Every artisan leaves fingerprints." Lestrade snorted. "Not literal fingerprints." "No." "Then what?" "A style." Holmes turned toward us. "A particular way of cutting wood, shaping metal, mixing paint." The inspector shrugged. "Perhaps." "Not perhaps." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Certainly." He pointed at the watch. "This object is a signature." "A signature from whom?" "That," said Holmes, "is precisely what we shall discover." Our destination proved unexpected. Rather than returning to Baker Street, Holmes directed the cab toward Clerkenwell. The district lay largely deserted at that hour. Dark workshops lined narrow streets. Their windows reflected the glow of distant lamps. Presently we stopped before a modest brick building bearing a weathered sign. Elias Finch, Horologist. The clockmaker unlocked the door. A bell tinkled overhead as we entered. The workshop beyond was unlike any room I had ever seen. Hundreds of clocks occupied the walls. Grandfather clocks, Mantel clocks, regulators, marine chronometers, pocket watches, every conceivable device for measuring time. Ordinarily, such a collection might have seemed comforting. Tonight it felt strangely oppressive. The combined ticking created a ceaseless whisper that filled the room like distant rainfall. Even Lestrade appeared unsettled. Good Lord! Holmes walked slowly among the shelves. His keen eyes missed nothing. The workbench occupied the rear of the shop. Tools lay arranged with meticulous precision. Beside them stood an oil lamp. "This is where you examined the watch?" Holmes asked. "Yes." Finch pointed toward a stool. "I sat there and discovered the hidden compartment." "Exactly." Holmes immediately lowered himself into the chair. For several minutes he remained motionless. Then he smiled. "Excellent." Lestrade groaned. "What now?" "I understand why he found it." The inspector blinked. "You do?" "Of course." Holmes pointed toward the lamp. The compartment becomes visible only from this angle. Finch stared. Remarkable. Holmes opened the watch. He tilted it beneath the light. A tiny shadow appeared near the hinge. Without hesitation, he pressed a concealed spring. A narrow panel slid open. Even Finch gasped. I never noticed that. Neither had I. The hidden recess was scarcely larger than a postage stamp. Yet Holmes was already examining it through his lens. What do you see? I asked. Traces. Of paper, among other things. He scraped delicately at the interior. A minute quantity of dark residue appeared upon the tip of his knife. Holmes sniffed it. His eyes brightened. Interesting. Lestrade sighed. Will you share your thoughts with the rest of humanity? Eventually. What is it? Ink. Naturally. Not naturally. Holmes held up the blade. This particular ink is uncommon. Finch looked surprised. You can identify it? I can identify part of it. Holmes rose. Watson. Yes? We require a directory. The clockmaker produced one from a shelf. Holmes began turning pages rapidly. His finger halted. There. What have you found? I asked. A possibility. Lestrade threw up his hands. Another possibility. Holmes ignored him. Instead he read aloud. Jeremiah Voss. The name meant nothing to me. Apparently it meant little to Lestrade as well. Finch, however, reacted instantly. His face went pale. No. Holmes looked up. You know the name? Everyone in the trade knows it. The clockmaker's voice had become uneasy. Or knew it. Explain. Finch glanced toward the watch. Jeremiah Voss was a genius. Holmes smiled. Those are often troublesome. He built extraordinary clocks. What happened to him? No one knows. A curious silence followed. Meaning? Asked Lestrade. Finch swallowed. He vanished. When? 20 years ago. The inspector frowned. People disappear every day. Not like Voss. The old craftsman moved toward a cabinet. After searching briefly, he produced a yellowed newspaper clipping. Holmes took it. The article was badly faded. Nevertheless, the headline remained legible. Renowned clockmaker disappears under mysterious circumstances. I read over Holmes's shoulder. According to the report, Jeremiah Voss had owned a workshop in Whitechapel. One morning he simply vanished. No body was discovered. No explanation emerged. His business closed. His apprentices scattered. The mystery remained unsolved. Holmes folded the clipping carefully. And his clocks? Rare. Valuable? Extremely. Finch hesitated. There were rumours. About what? The old man's voice lowered. That Voss believed time could reveal the future. Lestrade laughed outright. Nonsense. Of course it is nonsense. Finch nodded quickly. Yet people talked. What sort of people? Asked Holmes. Former employees, customers. And what did they claim? The clockmaker shifted uneasily. They said Voss became obsessed. With patterns. The room seemed quieter suddenly. Even the ticking of the clocks felt distant. He believed every event left traces before it occurred. Lestrade rolled his eyes. Madness. Undoubtedly. Finch looked toward the silver watch. But then there is this. No one spoke. At last Holmes broke the silence. Where was his workshop? Whitechapel. Does it still stand? I believe so. Holmes checked his pocket watch. 11 o'clock. 1 hour remained until the predicted murder. He closed the case with a snap. Excellent! Lestrade stared. Excellent! Indeed. We have a possible murderer on the loose. Perhaps. And you wish to visit an abandoned workshop? Precisely. The inspector muttered something unflattering beneath his breath. Holmes smiled. Come, Lestrade. If our unknown prophet is arranging a murder tonight, the answer may already be waiting for us. 40 minutes later, we stood in Whitechapel. The fog had thickened further. Buildings loomed like ghosts. Street lamps struggled against the darkness. Finch guided us through a maze of narrow lanes until we reached a neglected structure squeezed between two warehouses. Its windows were boarded. Its sign hung crooked above the entrance. The faded lettering remained barely visible. Jeremiah Voss, Clocks and Chronometers. A strange sensation passed through me. The building seemed abandoned, yet somehow not empty. Holmes approached the door. He examined the lock. Then he smiled. "What is it now?" asked Lestrade. Holmes pointed. "The dust. I see dust." "Exactly." The inspector stared blankly. Holmes's smile widened. "This workshop is not abandoned." "What?"
Someone entered recently.
Lestrade stepped closer. "You're certain?"
Quite.
"How long ago?" Holmes studied the marks. "Within 48 hours." The inspector's face hardened. "Then we go inside." Holmes nodded. For once they were in complete agreement. Lestrade signalled two accompanying constables forward. The lock yielded after several moments' effort. The door creaked open. A breath of stale air drifted outward. Darkness filled the interior. Holmes lit his lantern. Its glow revealed a long room choked with dust-covered machinery. Benches, cabinets, clock cases, broken tools. Everything appeared untouched by time itself. And then I noticed something. At the far end of the workshop stood a tall grandfather clock. Unlike everything around it, it was spotless, perfectly clean, as though someone had polished it that very day. Holmes saw it at the same instant. Without a word, he began walking toward it. The pendulum moved, slowly, steadily, tick, 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 and above the dial, engraved into the wood, were 4 chilling words: "Time remembers all things," the very same inscription found upon the silver watch. Holmes stopped. For the first time that night, I saw genuine excitement flash across his face. "We are close now, Watson." Then his expression changed abruptly. He raised one hand. Quiet. Everyone froze. From somewhere deep within the building came a sound. A floorboard creaking. A footstep. Someone else was inside the workshop. And judging by the sudden silence that followed, they had just realized we were there. Chapter 4. The Hidden Apprentice. The sound lasted scarcely a second. A single creak. A single shift of weight upon an aging floorboard. Yet in that silent workshop it seemed as loud as a pistol shot. Every man present heard it. Lestrade reacted first. "Who's there?" His voice echoed through the darkness. No answer came. The inspector drew a revolver. The 2 constables followed suit. Holmes, however, remained perfectly still. His lantern illuminated only part of the vast room. Beyond its glow stretched a wilderness of shadows. Rows of abandoned machinery stood like silent sentinels. Dust-covered clock cases loomed against the walls, and somewhere among them an unseen figure waited. Holmes raised a hand. "Do not move." Lestrade frowned. "The fellow may escape." If he intended to escape, he would already be running. The inspector looked unconvinced. Nevertheless, he obeyed. For nearly half a minute, nobody spoke, nobody moved. Then Holmes smiled. "There." "What?" I whispered. "The breathing." I listened. At first I heard nothing beyond the countless faint ticks of dormant clocks. Then, gradually, another sound emerged. Breathing, uneven, nervous, close by. Holmes lifted the lantern higher. "Come out." Silence. "I assure you," Holmes continued calmly, "that hiding is no longer useful." Still no response. Lestrade stepped forward. "Enough of this." Suddenly a figure darted from behind a row of cabinets. A young man, thin, quick. He bolted toward the rear of the workshop. "Stop!" Lestrade lunged after him. The constables followed. The chase exploded into motion. The fugitive raced through the maze of machinery. Holmes and I pursued close behind. The young man clearly knew the building. Twice he vanished around corners, only to reappear elsewhere. A cabinet toppled behind him. Wood shattered. Dust filled the air. Then, just as he reached a narrow passageway near the back wall, Holmes acted. With astonishing precision, he seized a long metal rod from a workbench and hurled it forward. The rod struck the floor directly before the fleeing man. Startled, the fugitive stumbled. A constable immediately tackled him. The struggle lasted only seconds. Then it was over. The prisoner sat against the wall, breathing heavily. He appeared no older than 25. Dark hair, sharp features, intelligent eyes. His clothes were respectable but worn. Holmes crouched before him. "What is your name?" The young man remained silent. "Very well." Holmes examined him. "A craftsman." No response. "A clockmaker." The prisoner's expression flickered. Holmes noticed instantly. "Indeed." Lestrade crossed his arms. "You know this fellow?" "No." "Then how?" "The burn marks upon his fingers." Holmes pointed. "Fresh brass dust beneath the nails." The inspector sighed. "Of course." The prisoner looked from one face to another. Finally he spoke. "My name is Matthew Crane." "Excellent," said Holmes. "And what were you doing here?" Crane hesitated. "I came to look." "At what?" The young man glanced toward the grandfather clock. Something in his expression caught Holmes's attention. "You knew about that clock?" No answer. Holmes stood. "Interesting." Lestrade stepped closer. "You can explain yourself at the yard." Crane's face paled. "No." "Yes. You don't understand." The young man looked genuinely frightened. "What exactly do we not understand?" asked Holmes. For several moments Crane remained silent. Then he spoke quietly. "He's watching." A strange stillness followed. "Who is watching?" I asked. Crane looked around the workshop. His fear appeared entirely genuine. "Him." "Whom?" The young man's voice became scarcely audible. "Voss," Lestrade groaned. "Oh, splendid." "He is dead," said Holmes calmly. Crane shook his head. "No." "Then where is he?" "I don't know." "Have you seen him?" "No." "Then why do you believe he lives?" The prisoner's gaze shifted toward the spotless grandfather clock. "Because the messages continue." The room became silent once more. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "What messages?" Crane immediately regretted speaking. His expression revealed as much. Holmes smiled faintly. "Ah." The young man lowered his head. "You already know about them." "Some of them." Holmes pointed toward the grandfather clock. "Show me." Crane stared. For the first time, uncertainty replaced fear. "You wish to see?" "I do." After a long hesitation, the prisoner rose. The constables remained close. He approached the great clock. Its pendulum continued its steady motion. Tick, tick, tick. Without speaking, Crane reached beneath the wooden case. His fingers located something hidden. A concealed latch clicked. To my astonishment, part of the clock's side panel swung open. Inside lay a narrow compartment. Holmes immediately stepped forward. The compartment contained papers. Dozens of them, folded notes, letters, small envelopes, some yellow with age, others comparatively recent. "Good heavens," I murmured. Holmes carefully removed one. He opened it. A date. Nothing more. Another contained a name. Another contained both. The detective's expression grew increasingly thoughtful. Lestrade peered over his shoulder. "What does it mean?" "At present?" Holmes replaced the papers. "Very little." Crane laughed bitterly. "That is because you have not read enough." "Perhaps." The young man pointed toward the oldest envelopes. "Those are from 20 years ago." Holmes selected one. The paper crackled with age. He unfolded it. A name appeared. Jonathan Reeves. Beneath it stood a date. October 17th, 1874. Holmes looked up. "And?" Crane swallowed. "Jonathan Reeves died on that date." The workshop suddenly seemed colder. Lestrade's skepticism wavered. "How do you know?" "I checked." "Why?" "Because I did not believe it." The young man's eyes darkened. "Not at first." Holmes continued examining the papers. Many names appeared unfamiliar. Others, however, were recognizable. Businessmen, lawyers, merchants. Several had indeed died, some violently, some under curious circumstances. The dates matched, again and again, again and again. A disturbing pattern emerged. At last Holmes spoke. "Who discovered these?" "I did." "When?" "3 months ago." "How?" Crane looked embarrassed. "I was curious. A dangerous habit." "I know." The young man gestured around the room. "I admired Voss. Even now, especially now." Holmes studied him carefully. "You never met him?" "No. Yet you became obsessed." Crane lowered his eyes. "Perhaps." The detective nodded. "Continue." "I began visiting the workshop. And one evening I found the compartment." "What did you do?" "I read everything." The young man's voice trembled. "I thought it was a joke. But then I checked the records." His face grew pale. The dates were real. No one spoke. At length Holmes asked the obvious question. "Did you place any of these messages yourself?" "No." "Have you ever altered them?" "Never." "Removed any?" "No." Holmes appeared satisfied. For several moments he paced the room. Then something on the far wall caught his attention. He stopped. "What is that?" Everyone turned. A large portrait hung near the ceiling. Dust obscured most details. Nevertheless, the subject remained visible. A man of perhaps 50. Thin-faced, sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed. His expression possessed an unsettling intensity. Holmes approached. "Jeremiah Voss?" Crane nodded. "Yes." The detective examined the painting closely. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. "What is amusing?" asked Lestrade. Holmes pointed toward the portrait. "The eyes." "What about them?" "They are wrong." The inspector stared. "They look normal to me." "Of course they do." Holmes climbed onto a nearby bench. With careful fingers he tilted the frame slightly. Something clicked. At once a section of wall behind the portrait shifted. A concealed panel slid open. Crane gasped. "I never knew." Neither had anyone else. Beyond the hidden doorway lay darkness. Holmes lifted the lantern. Its light revealed a narrow passage descending beneath the workshop. Lestrade's jaw dropped. A secret room. No, Holmes smiled. A secret stairway. The detective began descending. We followed. The stone steps wound downward for perhaps 30 feet. At their end stood a heavy iron door. Unlike everything above, it appeared well maintained. Recently used. Holmes touched the handle. Then he looked toward us. "Prepare yourselves." "Why?" I asked. His expression became unusually serious. "Because someone has been working here." The door swung open. The lantern light spilled into the chamber beyond, and every man present stopped dead. The room was enormous, far larger than the workshop overhead. Shelves lined every wall. Thousands of documents filled them. Names, dates, maps, photographs, newspaper clippings, ledgers, personal records, an archive of astonishing scale. At the center stood a massive table. Upon it lay a large open ledger. Holmes stepped forward. His eyes scanned the page. Suddenly, his expression hardened. "What is it?" I asked. Without speaking, he turned the ledger toward us. A list of names filled the page. Beside each stood a date. Near the bottom, written in fresh ink, appeared a final entry. November 21st, 1894. Midnight. The space reserved for the victim's name was blank, but beneath it, someone had written 4 chilling words. "The selection is complete." For several seconds nobody moved. Then, somewhere above us, a clock began striking. One slow chime after another. Holmes counted automatically. 11:30. Only 30 minutes remained until midnight, and whoever maintained this secret archive already knew the victim had been chosen. Chapter 5. The Ledger of the Dead. The final stroke of the clock echoed faintly through the underground chamber. 11:30. Only 30 minutes remained until the predicted murder. No one spoke. The words written upon the ledger seemed to hold us all in their grip. The selection is complete. Inspector Lestrade was the first to recover. This is enough for me. He struck the table with his palm. We have proof that someone is planning a crime. Not proof, said Holmes quietly. Lestrade stared. Not proof. No. Holmes's gaze remained fixed upon the ledger. We have evidence. What's the difference? A very important one. The detective leaned closer to the page. Evidence points. Yes. Proof concludes. Lestrade muttered something under his breath. Holmes ignored him. His attention had become wholly absorbed by the sprawling archive. Rows upon rows of records surrounded us. Thousands of pages. Thousands of names. Enough information to occupy a researcher for years. Yet, Holmes appeared to know precisely where to begin. Watson. Yes? Look around. I obeyed. At first glance, the archive seemed chaotic. Documents covered every available surface. Shelves overflowed with ledgers and files. Maps hung from walls. Bundles of correspondence lay stacked in careful piles. Yet after a moment, a hidden order became apparent. Everything was categorized. Everything was organized. Every item occupied a deliberate position. Whoever maintained the collection possessed an extraordinarily methodical mind. Do you notice it? Holmes asked. The arrangement? Precisely, I nodded. It resembles a library devoted to people. Lestrade frowned. What people? Holmes removed a folder from a shelf. Let us discover. He opened it. Inside lay newspaper clippings, financial statements, personal letters, several photographs, all concerned a single individual, a merchant named Harold Wren. The folder also contained a date, May 12, 1882. Holmes replaced it. He selected another, and another. The pattern remained identical. Each file documented the life of a different person. Every detail had been collected, recorded, preserved. The sheer scale of the effort was staggering. Good Lord, I murmured. Indeed. Holmes withdrew a fourth folder. His expression sharpened. Ah, what is it? Something useful. He handed me the file. The name upon its cover was immediately familiar. Horace Bellamy, the first known victim connected to the mysterious predictions. I opened the folder. Its contents surprised me. Rather than criminal records or evidence of wrongdoing, it contained biographical information, business transactions, property ownership records, correspondence, family details, nothing remarkable, nothing sinister, yet Holmes seemed interested. Read the employment section. I found the relevant page. My eyes moved quickly across it. Then I stopped. Holmes. Yes? He once worked for Jeremiah Voss. The detective smiled. Exactly. Lestrade stepped forward. What? I checked again. There could be no mistake. In 1873, Horace Bellamy had been employed as an accountant by the Clockmaker. The revelation created an immediate silence. Holmes removed another folder. This one concerned Sir Adrian Mowbray. Again he turned directly to the employment records. And again a familiar name appeared. Jeremiah Voss. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Lestrade's eyes widened. You don't mean... I do. Holmes selected 3 more files, one after another. The result remained unchanged. Each individual possessed a connection to the vanished clockmaker. Some had worked for him. Others had invested in his business. One had served as legal counsel. But all roads led back to the same man, Jeremiah Voss, the long dead or long disappeared master clockmaker. Lestrade whistled softly. Well, precisely. The inspector folded his arms. So Voss is taking revenge. Holmes shook his head. Too simple. Simple doesn't mean wrong. True. The detective closed the final file. Yet something troubles me. What? Holmes walked slowly around the chamber. The timeline. Lestrade frowned. What about it? If Voss vanished 20 years ago, why wait until now? The inspector opened his mouth, then closed it again. Holmes continued. Why begin the murders in recent months? No answer presented itself. The question lingered heavily in the air. At length Matthew Crane spoke. Perhaps he was waiting. Holmes looked toward him. For what? I don't know. The young man's voice was uncertain. But the records become more frequent recently. What do you mean? Crane approached a shelf. After searching briefly, he produced several ledgers. These. Holmes opened one. Its pages contained observations, notes, names, dates, all written in an elegant hand. The detective turned page after page. His eyes narrowed, then suddenly he stopped. Interesting. What have you found? I asked. He pointed. A date, January 1894. Below it appeared a single sentence. The last of them approaches their reckoning. A curious chill passed through me. Holmes examined additional entries. Each became increasingly focused, increasingly urgent, as though the writer had spent decades preparing for something now finally within reach. Then Holmes turned the page. A loose sheet slipped free. It fluttered onto the table. I picked it up. The paper contained a list, 7 names. 2 were crossed out. Horace Bellamy, Sir Adrian Mowbray. The remaining 5 remained untouched. One name immediately caught Holmes's attention. He snatched the page from my hand. His eyes widened. For perhaps the first time since the case began, genuine alarm appeared upon his face. "What is it?" I demanded. Holmes looked at Lestrade. "We must leave immediately." "Why?" "No questions." The detective thrust the paper into his pocket. "Come." Lestrade hesitated. "Holmes." "Now." Something in his tone ended all argument. Within moments we were climbing the stairs. The detective moved with unusual speed. I hurried beside him. "What did you see?" He did not answer. Not until we emerged into the workshop above. Then he stopped. "Watson." "Yes? Do you remember Lord Bancroft?" The name sounded familiar. Then I recalled. "Member of Parliament?" "Precisely." "What about him?" Holmes's expression darkened. "He is on the list." I felt a sudden shock. Good heavens! The next uncrossed name. And the predicted murder occurs at midnight. I checked my watch. 11:43. 17 minutes remained. Lestrade cursed. "Where does Bancroft live?" "Belgrave Square." The inspector turned toward the constables. "We move at once." The journey proved agonizing. Every delay felt unbearable. The fog hindered progress. Traffic blocked several streets. Twice our cab was forced to detour. Holmes spent the entire journey staring through the window, silent, focused, calculating. I had seen him thus before. Whenever the pieces of a puzzle approached alignment, his mind seemed to withdraw into some private realm inaccessible to ordinary men. At last we reached Belgrave Square. The great houses loomed behind iron gates. Gas lamps cast pale pools of light upon the pavement. Holmes leapt from the cab before it fully stopped. Quickly, we hurried toward Lord Bancroft's residence. A servant answered the door. The man's surprise at our appearance was obvious. "Inspector Lestrade, is Lord Bancroft home?" "Yes, sir." "We must see him immediately." The servant hesitated. Then a voice sounded from within. "What is the meaning of this?" A tall gentleman appeared in the hallway, silver-haired, distinguished, perhaps 60 years of age, Lord Bancroft himself. Lestrade stepped forward. "My lord, we believe you may be in danger." The aristocrat blinked. "Danger? Your life may be threatened." A brief silence followed. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Lord Bancroft laughed. Not politely, not nervously, genuinely laughed. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "You find this amusing?" "I find it remarkable." The nobleman studied each of us. Then his gaze settled upon Holmes. "Tell me." "Yes?" "Did the warning come from a watch?" No one spoke. The smile slowly vanished from Bancroft's face. And suddenly I knew. He recognized the mystery. Perhaps he had recognized it long before we arrived. Holmes took a step forward. "You know about the watch." The aristocrat hesitated, then nodded, "Yes." The detective's expression hardened. "How?" Lord Bancroft glanced toward the grandfather clock standing in the hall. Its hands showed 11:52. Only 8 minutes remained. At last he spoke. "Because 20 years ago, gentlemen," his voice became almost a whisper, "I helped destroy Jeremiah Voss." The confession struck us like a thunderclap. Before anyone could reply, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deep inside the house. A window shattering, then a scream, a woman's scream. Everyone froze. The sound had come from the upper floor. Holmes was already moving. Too late. He sprinted toward the staircase. The rest of us followed, and above us, somewhere in the darkness of Lord Bancroft's residence, the murderer had arrived. Chapter 6. The Midnight Intruder. Holmes reached the staircase first. Never in all my years beside him had I seen him move with greater urgency. The scream had come from the upper floor. Another cry followed almost immediately, though this one ended abruptly, as if smothered by a hand. Lord Bancroft turned pale. "My wife!" Without waiting for anyone, the elderly nobleman rushed upward. Lestrade swore. The constables followed close behind. Within seconds we were ascending the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. The hall above stretched before us, dimly illuminated by gas lamps fixed to the walls. Several doors stood open, others remained closed. At the far end, a maid stood trembling. She pointed frantically. There! A bedroom door hung half open. Holmes reached it first. He pushed it wide. The room beyond was empty. A shattered window overlooked the rear garden. Cold night air rushed inside. Curtains billowed violently. Lady Bancroft sat upon the floor near the bed. Though shaken, she appeared unharmed. Her maid knelt beside her. Lestrade looked around. "What happened?" Lady Bancroft struggled to speak. "A man." "What man?" "He came through the window." Holmes immediately crossed to the opening. Outside lay darkness. Fog drifted across the garden below. The detective examined the sill, then the floor, then the broken glass. A curious smile appeared upon his face. "Interesting," Lestrade groaned. "Please tell me that means something useful." "It means our intruder is clever." The inspector approached. "What do you see?" Holmes pointed. "The glass." "What about it?" "It lies outside." Lestrade blinked. The implication struck him a moment later. The window was broken from inside. "Exactly." Lady Bancroft stared. "But I saw him." "Did you?" Holmes turned toward her. "Describe the man." The noblewoman hesitated. "He wore dark clothing." "Height?" "I am not sure." "Face?" "I could not see clearly." Holmes nodded. "Understandable." Lord Bancroft looked bewildered. "You think she imagined him?" "No." "Then what?" Holmes straightened. "I think someone wanted her to believe an intruder entered through the window." Silence followed. The detective examined the room once more. Then his attention settled upon a writing desk. A single sheet of paper rested there. It had not been present when the household retired for the evening. Holmes crossed the room and lifted it carefully. His expression darkened. "What is it?" I asked. Without speaking, he handed me the note. The message consisted of only one sentence. "The 3rd hour draws near." No signature, no explanation, nothing else. Lord Bancroft stared at the paper. The colour drained from his face. "Oh God." Holmes looked up sharply. "You recognize it?" The nobleman nodded. "Yes." "From where?" For several seconds Bancroft remained silent. Then he lowered himself into a chair. Suddenly, he looked far older than before. His shoulders sagged. His eyes seemed haunted. "I suppose there is no longer any point in concealing the truth." Holmes folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. "I would advise complete honesty." The nobleman nodded slowly. Then he began. 20 years earlier, Jeremiah Voss had stood among the most respected craftsmen in London. His clocks were sought by collectors across Europe. His inventions attracted attention even from scientific societies. His reputation appeared secure, but appearances, as Holmes often remarked, possess an unfortunate tendency toward deception. Voss had required investors to expand his workshop. Several influential men supplied the necessary capital. Among them were Lord Bancroft, Sir Adrian Mowbray, Horace Bellamy, and others whose names now appeared upon the mysterious list. It was a partnership, Bancroft explained, at least initially. What changed? Holmes asked. The aristocrat looked away. Money. Naturally. Bancroft laughed bitterly. We discovered a flaw. What sort of flaw? Voss was a genius. Holmes remained silent. Unfortunately, he was also obsessed. The nobleman's hands trembled. He spent vast sums pursuing impossible ideas, such as machines capable of predicting future events. Lestrade rolled his eyes. Madness. Perhaps. Bancroft nodded. Yet he believed it absolutely. The room fell quiet. He claimed patterns existed, the nobleman continued. Patterns hidden within human behavior. What kind of patterns? I asked. He said, every decision creates ripples. Bancroft stared into the distance, and that those ripples reveal what must eventually happen. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. Did he prove any of this? No. Then why support him? Because everything else he built worked. The answer carried uncomfortable logic. A genius in one field often earns trust in another, even when such trust proves undeserved. What happened then? Asked Holmes. Bancroft sighed heavily. We withdrew funding. And he refused to stop. The nobleman's voice became strained. He mortgaged property, borrowed money, sold assets. His gaze dropped. Eventually the workshop collapsed. The implication became clear. Voss was ruined, I said. Yes. The room grew silent. Holmes studied the aristocrat carefully. You have omitted something. Bancroft looked up sharply. I beg your pardon? You are leaving out the most important detail. The nobleman froze. Holmes continued. You are not describing business failure. No, you are describing bankruptcy. The detective stepped forward. Yet men do not disappear forever, because investors withdraw. Bancroft's face hardened. For several moments neither spoke. Then the aristocrat lowered his eyes. There was another matter. Holmes waited. At length Bancroft whispered, We accused him of fraud. Even Lestrade looked surprised. Fraud? Yes. Was he guilty? The nobleman hesitated. Too long, Holmes noticed. So, Bancroft closed his eyes. No. The answer seemed to exhaust him. No, he was not. Silence filled the room. Then why accuse him? Asked Holmes quietly. The aristocrat's voice became almost inaudible. To protect ourselves. No one spoke. The confession explained much, perhaps too much. A ruined genius, false accusations, public disgrace, disappearance. And now, 20 years later, a series of carefully orchestrated murders. The motive practically announced itself. Yet Holmes remained unconvinced. I could tell. His eyes retained that distant expression which appeared whenever some crucial piece refused to fit. At length he asked, What happened after the accusation? Bancroft swallowed. Voss vanished. Immediately? Within a week. And no trace was ever found. None. The nobleman spread his hands helplessly. We believed him dead. Holmes nodded slowly. Perhaps. The answer surprised me. The detective seldom used such uncertain language. Apparently it surprised Lestrade as well. You still think he's alive? I think very little. Holmes crossed to the window. Outside, midnight bells began sounding across London. One after another. Deep, resonant, unmistakable. The predicted hour had arrived. Every man in the room listened. 1, 2, 3. The chimes continued. No one spoke. No one moved. At last the final bell faded. Midnight. The appointed time. And nothing had happened. Lestrade exhaled. Well, the inspector's relief was obvious. It appears our prophet finally failed. Lord Bancroft looked equally relieved. Even I felt some measure of tension leave me. Perhaps the prediction had been wrong. Perhaps Holmes's intervention had disrupted the killer's plans. Then a voice spoke from the hallway. A servant, terrified, breathless. "My lord!" Everyone turned. The young man staggered into the room. His face was white. "What is it?" demanded Bancroft. The servant could barely speak. "The library. What about it?" "Mr. Fairchild." The name seemed familiar. Bancroft frowned. "My secretary." "Yes, my lord." The servant swallowed hard. Then he uttered the words none of us wished to hear. "He's dead." For one terrible moment, nobody moved. Holmes reacted first. "Take me there." The servant nodded frantically. We hurried from the room, down the staircase, along a corridor, toward the library. The door stood open. Several household staff clustered nearby. Their expressions told the story before we entered. Death had already arrived. The secretary lay sprawled beside the fireplace. A single wound marked his chest. The attack appeared swift, precise, professional. Lestrade knelt beside the body. After only seconds, he looked up. No use. Holmes was already searching the room. His gaze swept across shelves, desk, carpet, windows, everything. Then suddenly he stopped. A curious expression crossed his face. Not shock, not grief, recognition. The detective crouched beside the dead man. Slowly, he reached into the victim's hand. Something had been clenched within the fingers, a small folded piece of paper. Holmes opened it. His eyes narrowed. "What is it?" I asked. Without speaking, he handed me the note. The message consisted of only 4 words that caused a chill to pass through me. The wrong man died. The room fell utterly silent, and in that dreadful silence, Holmes finally understood something that had escaped him from the beginning. I saw it happen. The sudden flash in his eyes, the instant when scattered fragments became a complete picture. The detective rose slowly. For the first time since the case began, he looked genuinely disturbed. "Good heavens," he murmured. Lestrade stared. "What is it?" Holmes looked toward the corpse, then toward Lord Bancroft, and finally toward the mysterious note. When he spoke, his voice was unusually grave. "We have misunderstood the entire case." Chapter 7. The Wrong Man. For several seconds after Holmes spoke, nobody moved. The dead secretary lay beside the fireplace. The note remained in my hand. And Lord Bancroft stared at Holmes with an expression that combined confusion and dread. "We have misunderstood the entire case." Lestrade was the first to find his voice. "What exactly does that mean?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly around the library. His gaze lingered upon the desk. The bookshelves, the carpet, the body, every object seemed to acquire new significance. At length he stopped beside the fireplace. "The note tells us everything." I looked down at the message once more. The wrong man died. I failed to see how. Holmes turned toward me. "Do you, Watson?" I hesitated. "No." "Then let us examine it logically." He held out his hand. I returned the paper. "The wording is important." Naturally, if the murderer had succeeded, there would be no reason to leave such a message. Lestrade frowned. Meaning the writer is disappointed. The inspector blinked. "Disappointed?" "Precisely." Holmes folded the note. The death of Mr. Fairchild was not the intended outcome. Silence followed. Lord Bancroft looked pale. "You mean I was the target?" "No." The answer came so quickly that everyone stared. "Not you either." The aristocrat's eyes widened. "Then who?" Holmes walked toward the desk. Upon it stood several framed photographs, family portraits, political associates, household staff. The detective studied them carefully. Then he picked up one frame. A young woman smiled back at us, perhaps 20 years of age. Intelligent eyes, confident bearing. Who is this? Bancroft glanced at the photograph. My daughter. What is her name? Charlotte. Holmes nodded slowly. And where is Miss Bancroft tonight? The nobleman frowned. At a charity function. What time will she return? Shortly after midnight, I believe. The detective set the photograph down. His expression darkened. There. Lestrade stared. There what? The intended victim. A heavy silence settled upon the room. Lord Bancroft shook his head. No. Yes. Impossible. Holmes pointed toward the dead secretary. Mr. Fairchild was killed because he entered this room first. The aristocrat looked horrified. You are certain? No. Holmes's eyes flashed. But it is the first theory that explains every known fact. Lestrade crossed his arms. Explain. Holmes obliged. The prediction specified a murder. Correct. It did not specify the victim. Also correct. The killer entered the house expecting someone. The detective pointed toward the secretary. Instead, he encountered Mr. Fairchild. The inspector frowned. And killed him by mistake. Exactly. The room became quiet. The explanation possessed a dreadful plausibility. Yet something still troubled me. Holmes. Yes? If Charlotte Bancroft is the target, why? The detective's expression became thoughtful. A better question is this. What? Why is she connected to Jeremiah Voss? No one had an answer. Lord Bancroft appeared genuinely bewildered. My daughter never met the man. Perhaps. Holmes moved toward the secretary's body once more. He knelt. For several moments he examined the wound, then the victim's clothing. Finally, he checked the pockets. Something immediately caught his attention. Aha! Lestrade sighed. Whenever you say that, I know I'm about to dislike the explanation. Holmes withdrew a small brass key. Nothing remarkable about it. Or so it seemed. The detective held it beneath the lamp. A tiny symbol had been engraved upon the metal. A clock face. The same symbol we had encountered repeatedly throughout the investigation. Interesting. Lord Bancroft looked surprised. I've never seen that. Perhaps because it did not belong to Fairchild. What? Holmes turned the key over. It was placed there recently. Lestrade stepped forward. How do you know? Because the pocket lint lies beneath the key rather than upon it. The inspector stared, then shook his head. One day I shall stop being surprised. Not today, I think. Holmes slipped the key into his pocket. This may prove useful. The remainder of the night passed in a blur of activity. Scotland Yard secured the house. Statements were taken, servants questioned, evidence collected. Yet despite all efforts, the killer had vanished. No witness had seen his face. No footprints survived the damp conditions. No obvious trail existed. By 3 o'clock in the morning, we found ourselves once more in Baker Street. Holmes sat beside the fire. His violin rested across his knees. Yet he did not play. Instead, he stared into the flames. The expression upon his face told me that his thoughts remained entirely occupied by the case. I poured 2 glasses of brandy. He accepted one absent-mindedly. What troubles you? I asked. The secretary. Fairchild? Yes. Holmes swirled the brandy slowly. He should not have died. The note said as much. Indeed, my companion fell silent. Then suddenly he spoke again. Watson. Yes? Do you recall the archive beneath Voss's workshop? Certainly. The names. What about them? Holmes leaned forward. Something was missing. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. What? Women. The realization struck immediately. Every known name on the list had belonged to a man. Bellamy, Mowbray, Bancroft, others, all male. Yet Charlotte Bancroft was female. The contradiction seemed obvious. Holmes nodded. You see the difficulty. Then she cannot be the target. Perhaps not. The detective stood abruptly. Unless... He stopped. His eyes narrowed. I recognized the look instantly. Another piece had fallen into place. What is it? Instead of answering, Holmes crossed the room. He opened a drawer. From it, he removed the list recovered from the underground archive. The page containing 7 names. 3 now crossed out. Holmes spread it upon the table. Then he pointed toward a detail I had previously overlooked. A small notation beside Lord Bancroft's name. Not a word, not a date, merely a symbol, a circle divided into 12 sections, like the face of a clock. "Do you recognize it?" Holmes asked. No, I did not at first either. He smiled faintly, but then I examined the other entries. He produced additional notes. Each contained a similar symbol, subtly different. 1 section shaded here, 2 sections there, 3 elsewhere. The markings appeared random, until Holmes arranged them side by side. Suddenly a pattern emerged. The symbols formed a sequence, a progression, a countdown. My heart quickened. Good heavens! Exactly. Lestrade, who had arrived only moments earlier, peered over my shoulder. "What am I looking at?" Holmes pointed. "Not a list of victims." The inspector frowned. "Then what?" "A schedule." Silence followed. The detective's voice became quiet. "The murderer is not selecting people. He's selecting stages." "What stages?" Holmes looked toward the fire. For several moments he said nothing. Then he spoke. "I believe Jeremiah Voss created something." The room seemed to grow still. Something valuable. Valuable enough to kill for? Extremely. The detective tapped the list. Every victim possessed knowledge connected to it. I stared. "You mean the murders are not revenge?" "Not primarily." Holmes shook his head. "Revenge is merely a tool." The implications were enormous. Everything we believed about the case suddenly appeared uncertain. The disgraced inventor, the decades-old conspiracy, the predictions, the archive. Perhaps none of them meant what we assumed. Then Holmes removed the brass key recovered from Fairchild's pocket. He placed it upon the table, beside the list. Immediately something caught his eye. A tiny number engraved beneath the clock symbol. 7. Roman numerals. The number 7. Holmes froze. For perhaps 3 seconds he simply stared. Then he laughed. Not loudly, not triumphantly, but with genuine astonishment. "Remarkable." "What now?" demanded Lestrade. The detective looked up. "The key." "Yes, it is not a key." The inspector blinked. "Then what is it?" Holmes pointed toward the engraving. "A marker." "For what?" "The 7th location." The room became silent. My pulse quickened. "What 7th location?" Holmes slipped on his coat. "The answer to this mystery." Lestrade groaned. "Would you care to elaborate?" "No." The detective reached for his hat. "Because if I am correct, we have already wasted far too much time." "Where are we going?" Holmes smiled. "Back to Whitechapel." "To the workshop?" "Not exactly." His eyes gleamed with sudden excitement. "We are looking for something Jeremiah Voss hid 20 years ago." "And what might that be?" For the first time in hours, Holmes appeared genuinely energized. When he answered, his voice carried an unusual note of admiration. "The machine that started all of this." A silence followed. Then Lestrade spoke the question occupying every mind. "The machine that predicts murder." Holmes paused at the door. "No." His smile widened slightly. "I suspect it predicts something far more dangerous." And with those words he vanished into the foggy London dawn, leaving the rest of us scrambling to follow. Chapter 8. The 7th Marker. Dawn had not yet broken when we returned to Whitechapel. The fog remained dense, clinging to the streets like a physical presence rather than a natural phenomenon. Holmes walked ahead of us without hesitation, as though guided by some internal compass only he could perceive. Lestrade followed, visibly frustrated. "If this is another wild theory," he muttered, "I shall personally recommend you for admission to an asylum." Holmes did not turn. "Feel free to postpone your recommendation until after we arrive." The inspector grunted. Elias Finch kept close to Holmes, still clutching the silver watch, though now I noticed his grip had changed. No longer fear, something closer to anticipation, or dread sharpened into curiosity. Only Matthew Crane remained silent, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding alleys as if expecting the dead to step out from them. At last we reached the abandoned workshop of Jeremiah Voss. The building stood unchanged, cold, unforgiving. Its boarded windows gave no hint of the world beneath. Holmes stopped before the entrance. "We are not going inside." Lestrade frowned. "Then why return here?" Holmes pointed toward the street. "Because we have been looking at this problem incorrectly." I exchanged a glance with Finch. "Meaning?" Holmes removed the list from his coat. The one recovered from the underground archive. He unfolded it carefully. "The markers." Lestrade sighed. "I am beginning to dislike that word." Holmes ignored him. "Each symbol corresponds to a location." He pointed at the 7th entry. 7. Then he gestured toward the workshop. "This is not 7. Crane spoke suddenly. "Then what is?" Holmes looked up at the surrounding buildings. "The center." Silence followed. Even Lestrade stopped moving. Holmes continued. "Voss did not hide a machine in this workshop." "Where then?" I asked. A faint smile touched Holmes's lips. "He hid the workshop around the machine." The words took a moment to settle. Lestrade blinked. "That makes no sense." "On the contrary," said Holmes, "it makes perfect sense if one assumes Voss never intended it to be found from the outside." Finch's voice trembled slightly. "You mean there is something beneath all of this?" Holmes nodded. "And we are standing directly above it. We found the entrance beneath a derelict warehouse 2 streets away." Holmes had noticed it not through guesswork but observation. A subtle irregularity in the pavement, a ventilation pattern inconsistent with surrounding structures. A faint draft where none should exist. To Lestrade's visible irritation, Holmes had been correct. Again. A rusted iron hatch lay hidden beneath debris. It took all 4 of us to force it open. The sound echoed downward, a deep metallic groan, then silence. A ladder descended into darkness. Holmes went first, of course. I followed. Then Finch. Crane hesitated only briefly before descending as well. Lestrade brought up the rear, muttering about mad clockmakers and subterranean lunatics. The air grew colder as we descended. At the bottom lay a narrow passage carved from stone. Not natural, not modern, old, very old. Holmes lit his lantern. The light revealed symbols etched into the walls, clock faces, interlocking gears, numerical sequences, and always the same phrase repeated in varying forms. "Time does not flow, it returns," Finch whispered beside me. "I have never seen anything like this." Holmes continued forward. The passage widened gradually, then suddenly opened into a vast underground chamber, and we stopped, every one of us, because the room defied explanation. At its center stood a structure unlike any clock or machine I had ever seen. A towering framework of brass and steel, gears larger than carriage wheels, rotated slowly in suspended motion. Pendulums hung from the ceiling in precise alignment. Thin rods connected intricate assemblies that shifted without visible power, and surrounding it all, layer upon layer, were clock faces, hundreds of them, all ticking in perfect synchronization. Lestrade whispered, "Good God!" Holmes stepped forward slowly. For once, even he seemed momentarily speechless. Then he spoke. "Extraordinary." Finch approached cautiously. "What is it?" Holmes circled the structure. "A mechanism." "For what purpose?" The detective did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the movement of the gears, the alignment of the pendulums, the rhythm of the clocks. Then his eyes narrowed. "It is not measuring time," Lestrade scoffed. "What else would a machine of this kind measure?" Holmes looked up. "Probability." A silence followed. Crane shook his head. "You are wrong." Holmes turned toward him. You know this machine. The young man hesitated. I have only heard stories. Tell us. Crane swallowed. Voss believed time was not fixed. Holmes nodded. He was correct. Lestrade frowned. That is absurd. Is it? Holmes asked calmly. Crane continued. He believed events could be mapped, like trajectories. Yes. The apprentice gestured toward the machine. He called it the chronometric array. Finch looked stunned. A machine that predicts events. Crane shook his head. Not predicts. He hesitated. Calculates. Holmes stepped closer to the central mechanism. And what does it calculate? Crane's voice dropped. Consequences. A chill passed through the chamber. Lestrade looked uncomfortable. That is meaningless philosophy. Holmes did not respond. Instead, he examined a series of rotating discs near the base. Each bore inscriptions, names, dates, symbols, the same symbols we had seen in the archive. Holmes's voice softened. This is not a murder list. He looked at us. It is a model. Finch whispered. A model of what? Holmes pointed toward the machine's core. A life. Silence. Then Lestrade shook his head violently. No, I refuse to accept this. Machines do not predict human action. Holmes replied quietly, This one does not predict it. He paused. It reconstructs it. No one spoke. The implication was staggering. Holmes turned back to Crane. Why were the names in the archive? The apprentice hesitated. To feed it. Holmes nodded. And the murders? Crane looked away. Adjustments. The word hung in the air. Lestrade's face darkened. Adjustments to what? Holmes answered for him. The model. A long silence followed. Only the ticking of distant mechanisms filled the chamber. Then Holmes spoke again. Where is the control point? Crane looked toward a raised platform at the far end of the chamber. There. We followed his gaze. A console stood elevated above the machine. On it rested a single dial, marked with 12 divisions, the same clock symbol we had seen before. Holmes ascended the platform. He examined the dial carefully. Then he froze. What is it? I asked. Holmes did not answer. Instead, he looked down at the machine below. His expression had changed. Not surprise, not curiosity. Concern. Because he had finally understood the final piece. Slowly he spoke. This machine does not predict murder. He looked at us. It selects the conditions under which murder becomes inevitable. A heavy silence followed. Then Holmes reached into his pocket and removed the brass key marked 7. He held it above the dial, exactly aligned. The machine responded. A low mechanical hum filled the chamber. Gears shifted. Clocks realigned. And somewhere deep within the structure, a new sequence began to activate. Holmes's voice dropped. Someone has already started it. Lestrade stepped forward. Started what? Holmes turned slowly. The final cycle. From somewhere within the machine, a single clock struck midnight again. And this time, it was not in London. It was inside the machine itself. Chapter 9. The Machine That Remembers. The moment the machine struck its internal midnight, the chamber changed. Not visually at first, but perceptibly, as if the air itself had tightened. The synchronized ticking of hundreds of clocks faltered for a fraction of a second. So brief I might have doubted it had Holmes not visibly stiffened. Lestrade noticed too. Did you hear that? Holmes did not answer. His attention remained fixed upon the brass dial into which he had inserted the 7th marker. The machine was responding. Not randomly, not mechanically, but as though it recognized intent. Finch stepped backward. This is wrong, he whispered. Crane shook his head slowly. It is waking. Lestrade turned sharply. Machines do not wake. Holmes finally spoke. This one does. A low vibration passed through the floor. Dust drifted from overhead beams. Several of the suspended pendulums began to oscillate in altered rhythms, no longer uniform. Holmes stepped down from the platform. Watson. Yes? Stay away from the central structure. I obeyed immediately. And the rest of you, do not touch anything unless I instruct it. Lestrade bristled. You are not in command here. Holmes glanced at him. No, but I am the only one who understands what we are standing inside. That silenced him. Holmes walked slowly around the machine. His eyes tracked shifting components. Then he stopped near a secondary console, partially hidden behind a ring of rotating brass arms. This is new. Crane looked uneasy. It should not be active yet. Holmes turned sharply. What does that mean? The apprentice hesitated. The sequence was incomplete. Explain. Crane swallowed. There were 8 markers originally. Holmes's expression tightened. And now? Only one remains unconfirmed. Lestrade stepped closer. The 7th. Crane shook his head. Not anymore. A cold silence followed. Holmes looked toward the machine. Then the system has already bypassed the missing variable. Finch whispered. Is that dangerous? Holmes answered without looking at him. Everything here is dangerous. He leaned toward the secondary console. Engraved beneath it were names. Not random. Structured. Aligned, each name corresponded to one of the known victims. Horace Bellamy, Sir Adrian Mowbray. Others we had uncovered, but now Holmes noticed something new. Between the names were blank spaces, gaps, slots waiting to be filled. Lestrade frowned. What are those? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he examined the alignment of the machine's outer ring, then the inner ring, then the pendulum array. Finally, he spoke. They are variables. Crane nodded faintly. Yes. Holmes turned. And the blanks? The apprentice hesitated. Outcomes not yet resolved, Lestrade muttered. This is insanity. Holmes ignored him. Instead, he placed a hand near one of the rotating discs. It slowed slightly as if responding to his presence. The detective withdrew his hand. Interesting. Finch approached cautiously. What is interesting? Holmes looked at him. The machine reacts to observation. Lestrade scoffed. It is a machine. It reacts to input. No. Holmes shook his head. It reacts to attention. A heavy silence followed. Even Lestrade seemed uncertain how to respond to that. Holmes walked back toward the central core. Then something unexpected occurred. The machine emitted a deeper tone, not a chime, not a tick, a resonance, low, sustained, intentional. Crane stepped back immediately. It knows you are here. Holmes looked upward. I believe it has known for some time. Lestrade frowned. You are speaking as though it is alive. Holmes replied quietly. Define alive. No one answered. The resonance increased slightly. Then, from within the structure, a new sequence began to unfold. Several clock faces shifted simultaneously. Their hands moved backward, not forward, backward. Finch gasped. They are reversing time. Holmes corrected him immediately. No. He stepped closer. They are reversing outcomes. Lestrade shook his head. This is nonsense. Holmes pointed toward the rotating rings. Observe carefully. We did. At first it appeared chaotic, but gradually a pattern emerged. Each reversal corresponded to a known event, a death, a date, a prediction. The machine was not merely running forward through possibility, it was recalculating, rewriting sequences already observed. Holmes spoke softly. It is correcting itself. Crane nodded. Yes. Holmes turned sharply. Why? The apprentice hesitated. Because the model failed. Lestrade frowned. What model? Holmes answered before Crane could. Human behavior. A silence followed. Holmes continued. Voss attempted to map causality. Every decision, every consequence. He looked toward the machine. And something went wrong, Crane whispered. It became unstable. Holmes nodded. Because humans do not behave as deterministic systems. The machine's resonance deepened again. The lights embedded within its framework began to pulse, slowly, rhythmically, almost like breathing. Finch stepped back. "I do not like this." Holmes did not move. Instead, he studied the central axis of the machine, a cylindrical core suspended within a lattice of rotating gears. Inside it, something faintly glowed, a pale, shifting light. Lestrade pointed. "What is that?" Holmes narrowed his eyes. "The memory core." Crane shook his head. "It should not be active." Holmes turned to him. "Why is it?" The apprentice hesitated, then whispered, "Because it has completed 7 cycles." A chill passed through the chamber. Holmes stepped closer to the core. "And what happens at 8? Crane did not answer immediately. His expression said enough. Holmes finished for him. "It finalizes the system." Crane nodded slowly. "Yes." Lestrade raised his weapon. "Then we shut it down." Holmes stopped him. "Careful." "Why?" Holmes pointed toward the machine. "Because it is already compensating for interference." As if to confirm his words, several mechanical arms shifted position, blocking access points, restricting movement. The structure was reacting, defensively. Lestrade lowered his weapon slightly. "That is impossible." Holmes looked at him. "You are still assuming it is passive." The machine's hum deepened again. Then suddenly, the entire chamber darkened for a fraction of a second. When the lights returned, something had changed. A new name had appeared on one of the central panels. Fresh ink, fresh engraving, recent. Lestrade stepped forward. "That was not there before." Holmes stared at it. His voice dropped. "No," Finch whispered. "Whose name is it?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Then he spoke. "Mine." Silence collapsed across the chamber. Even the machine seemed to pause. Holmes studied the inscription carefully. Then he exhaled slowly. "I see." Lestrade looked alarmed. "What do you see?" Holmes turned toward us. "Why I was brought here." Crane stepped back. "I did not bring you." Holmes nodded. "Not you." He looked at the machine. It did. A deep mechanical tone resonated again, stronger now, more deliberate. And beneath it, faintly, another sequence began to form, a sequence not yet complete. Holmes stepped back slowly. "We are not here to stop a murder." He looked at us. "We are here to decide one." And in that moment, the machine's central core pulsed brighter, as if acknowledging him. Chapter 10. Holmes and the Final Equation. The moment Holmes declared that his name had appeared within the machine, the atmosphere in the chamber changed in a way no mechanical description could properly capture. It was not fear alone, nor surprise. It was the unsettling sensation of being observed by something that had no eyes yet saw everything. Lestrade took a step forward. "This is absurd." Holmes did not look at him. "It is inconvenient, yes." The inspector gestured toward the glowing core. "A machine cannot decide your fate." Holmes finally turned. "It has not decided anything yet." Crane spoke quietly from behind us. "It is calculating you." That single sentence seemed to settle over the room like dust. Finch whispered, "Why you?" Holmes moved slowly toward the central platform again. "That is the correct question." Lestrade followed. "Then answer it." Holmes stepped up onto the dais. The brass dial marked 7 still remained aligned. Now, beneath it, additional segments had begun to rotate into place. A configuration forming, a structure assembling itself in real time. Holmes studied it carefully. Voss made a critical assumption. "What assumption?" I asked. Holmes replied without turning. "That human observation is neutral." A faint mechanical pulse echoed through the chamber. He continued. "He believed if you could map all variables, you could determine all outcomes." Lestrade scoffed. "And?" He ignored the observer. Crane's eyes widened slightly. "The observer?" Holmes nodded. "In physics, in mathematics, in logic, observation is assumed passive." He tapped the console lightly. "This machine does not make that assumption." The central core brightened again. A slow, rhythmic expansion of light. Holmes stepped back slightly. "It incorporates the observer into the system." Finch looked unsettled. "You mean You are part of its calculations now. Holmes's voice was calm. I have been since we entered. A heavy silence followed. Lestrade muttered, "This is ridiculous." But even he sounded less certain now. Holmes walked around the dais. "Look closely." We did. The machine's inner rings were shifting again, but this time differently. Not correcting past events, not adjusting probabilities. Instead, converging. Lestrade frowned. Converging on what? Holmes answered, "A single outcome," Crane whispered, "the final run." Holmes nodded. "Yes." He studied the glowing inscriptions. "My name is not a target," he paused. "It is a variable." Finch stepped closer. "What does that mean?" Holmes turned toward him. "It means Voss did not design a system to predict murder. He looked at the machine. He designed one that selects the most stable future." Lestrade blinked. "The most stable future?" Holmes nodded. "Out of all possible sequences of human events," Crane added quietly, "only one survives iteration 8. A chill passed through the chamber. Lestrade shook his head. "This is philosophy dressed as engineering," Holmes replied. "No, it is engineering that discovered philosophy." The machine responded. A sudden tightening of sound. The resonance sharpened. The lights along the walls aligned into a pattern. Then, a projection appeared above the central core, floating, unreal, a schematic of London, but not as it was, as it might be. Intersections pulsed with light, buildings flickered, paths shifted, routes rewrote themselves in real time. Finch staggered backward. "It is mapping the city." Holmes nodded. "And the people within it." Lestrade stared upward. "That is impossible," Holmes spoke softly. "Yet it is happening." Crane pointed. "Look." At the far edge of the projection, a single point glowed brighter than the rest. Holmes narrowed his eyes. "What is that?" Crane answered. "The convergence node." Lestrade frowned. "And that is?" Holmes said quietly, "The moment all sequences collapse into one outcome." A pause. Then Lestrade's voice tightened. "When?" Holmes looked at the projection, then at the machine. "Very soon." A deeper tone emerged from the core. The system was accelerating. Not gradually, exponentially. Finch spoke in a low voice. "And your name?" Holmes studied the shifting patterns. "It is positioned at the center of the convergence field." Lestrade swallowed. "What does that mean?" Holmes answered without hesitation. "It means I am either the cause of stability," he paused, "or the cause of collapse." A long silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, the machine emitted a new sequence of chimes. 8 in total. Clear, precise, final. Crane's voice broke slightly. "It has begun." Lestrade lifted his weapon again. "We shut it down." Holmes did not move. "You cannot." "Why not?" Holmes looked at him. "Because it is no longer running on external input." The inspector hesitated. "Then what is it running on?" Holmes answered quietly. "Decision." As if responding to the word itself, the machine shifted again. The projection above changed, now showing multiple versions of Holmes, walking, speaking, investigating, dying, surviving. Each branch diverged, each outcome diverged further. Lestrade whispered, "What am I looking at?" Holmes replied, "My possible futures." Finch shook his head. "Which one is real?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Then he said, "That is no longer the correct question." The machine intensified. The chamber vibrated. The core brightened until it became painful to look at. Crane stepped back. "It is selecting." Holmes nodded slowly. "Yes." Lestrade shouted. "Selecting what?" Holmes turned toward the glowing core. "Me." A sudden mechanical surge echoed through the chamber. And in that instant, every clock in the machine stopped. Completely. Silence. Absolute. Then, one by one, they restarted. But not in sync. Not in sequence. Individually. As if each clock now represented a separate reality. Holmes exhaled slowly. I understand now. Lestrade frowned. What? Holmes looked at us. The murders were never the goal. He pointed upward at the convergence node. They were tests, Crane whispered. For what? Holmes answered. For whether I would interfere. A pause. Then he added quietly, and I always would. The machine pulsed once more. Then a final projection formed. A single line, a single outcome. Holmes's name, centered, highlighted. And beneath it, one instruction. Resolve the system. Holmes stared at it for a long time. Then he spoke softly. So that is the final equation? Lestrade asked. What does it want from you? Holmes turned slightly, and for the first time in the entire case, he looked uncertain. It wants me to choose. Chapter 11. The Choice of Sherlock Holmes. The words resolve the system, hung above the machine like an accusation that refused to fade. Holmes stood perfectly still beneath it. For once, the great detective did not pace, did not observe, did not immediately analyze. Instead, he simply watched the projection, his own name suspended at the center of a branching web of possible futures. Lestrade broke the silence first. This is your doing, he said sharply. Holmes did not look at him. No. Then whose? Holmes answered quietly. Jeremiah Voss believed he was designing a system that could predict human behavior, Crane added softly. But it learned from him. Finch shook his head. That doesn't explain why it chose you. Holmes finally turned. It does. A pause. Then he continued. Because I am the variable that cannot be stabilized, the machine responded. A low, resonant pulse, as if acknowledging the statement. Lestrade tightened his grip on his revolver. I am done listening to riddles. Either we shut this thing down, or we leave and bring half the army back. Holmes stepped down from the dais. Neither will work. Why not? Holmes gestured toward the glowing structure. Because it is no longer external. Crane nodded slowly. It has already integrated the entire sequence. Finch whispered. Then it cannot be stopped. Holmes paused. That depends. On what? I asked. Holmes looked at the projection again. On it, his name remained fixed, while every other line of possibility shifted around it like water around a stone. On whether the system is truly complete. Lestrade frowned. What does that mean? Holmes answered. A complete system produces one outcome. He pointed. But this one still offers branches. Crane's face went pale. Then it is not finished. Holmes nodded. No. A heavy silence followed. The machine pulsed again. Stronger this time. The projection flickered. New paths appeared. Older ones collapsed. It was rewriting itself in real time. Finch stepped back. It's changing again. Holmes narrowed his eyes. Yes, Lestrade muttered. So what do we do? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward the central console. Each step was deliberate, measured, as if he were approaching something that might respond. When he reached the platform, he placed his hand near the dial marked 7. The machine reacted instantly. The entire chamber vibrated. Crane shouted, "Don't touch it." Holmes withdrew his hand. I didn't. Lestrade looked confused. Then what? Holmes interrupted. It reacted to intent. A pause. Then Holmes straightened. This is no longer a mechanical system. Finch whispered. Then what is it? Holmes answered. A reasoning system. The machine's lights intensified. The projection above fractured into multiple overlapping Holmeses again. Each one speaking. Each one acting. Each one choosing differently. Lestrade stared upward. It's showing alternatives again. Holmes nodded. And now it is waiting for resolution. Crane looked terrified. Resolution happens at convergence, Holmes replied. No. He turned. It happens at decision. A silence followed. Then Lestrade spoke. So decide. Holmes looked at him. That is precisely the problem. The inspector frowned. What problem? Holmes stepped down again. This machine is not asking what I will do. He paused. It is asking what I must do. Finch swallowed. And what is the difference? Holmes answered immediately. Freedom. The word echoed strangely in the chamber. For a moment, even the machine seemed to quiet. Then, a new projection appeared. Not of London, not of branching futures, but of Holmes himself, standing in this very chamber, at this exact moment, observing, thinking, deciding. Lestrade stepped forward. That's you. Holmes nodded. Yes, Crane whispered. It is simulating you. Holmes corrected him. No, he looked at the image. It is anticipating me. The machine emitted a deeper tone. The core brightened again, and now the image changed, showing Holmes reaching for the dial, turning it, and triggering an outcome none of us had yet seen. Lestrade stepped back. Wait, that's the future? Holmes studied it carefully. No. What then? Holmes's voice lowered. It is a suggestion. The chamber fell silent. Finch looked confused. A suggestion? Holmes nodded. Every system that models behavior eventually attempts persuasion, Crane added quietly, because prediction alone is incomplete. Lestrade shook his head. This is madness. Holmes looked at him. Is it? Then he turned back to the projection. A final sequence had begun forming. 3 outcomes, 3 branches, all centered on Holmes's hand approaching the dial. Holmes spoke quietly. There are only 3 remaining possibilities. Lestrade frowned. And they are? Holmes answered, shut it down. Let it complete, or become part of it. A heavy silence followed. Finch whispered, and which is correct? Holmes did not answer. For the first time, he seemed genuinely uncertain. He stepped closer to the console. The machine responded immediately. The projection stabilized. All branches converging toward a single moment. Holmes's hand. The dial. The decision. Crane stepped back. It is finalizing. Lestrade raised his voice. Holmes, choose. Holmes stared at the machine. Long, unblinking. Then he spoke softly. What if the correct answer is not among the 3? The machine pulsed violently. The chamber shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The projection fractured again, but this time not into 3 paths, into thousands. Lestrade shouted, What did you do? Holmes took a slow breath. I questioned the premise. A deep mechanical sound filled the chamber, louder now. Unstable. Crane backed away. It's collapsing. Finch covered his ears. No, it's expanding. Holmes remained still, watching. And then the machine spoke. Not in sound, but in structured light. A single sentence forming across every surface of the chamber. Unknown variable detected, Holmes whispered. There it is. Lestrade stared. What does that mean? Holmes turned slightly. It means Voss never accounted for me asking the wrong question. The machine surged, and for the first time, it began to fail. Not toward shutdown, not toward completion, but toward contradiction. Holmes stepped back from the console. The projection flickered wildly, then stabilized again, this time showing only one image, not Holmes choosing, not Holmes acting, but Holmes refusing. Lestrade looked up. What is it doing now? Holmes answered quietly. It is trying to resolve me. A pause. Then he added, and it cannot. Chapter 12. The Collapse of Voss. The chamber did not explode. It did not shatter. It simply began to unravel. Slowly at first, almost politely, like a system that had discovered it was no longer internally consistent. The great brass machine that had once dominated the underground space began to stutter. Gears that had moved with impossible precision now hesitated mid-rotation. Pendulums lost rhythm. Clock faces froze, then restarted at conflicting intervals, and the projection above us, once stable, once terrifyingly coherent, fractured into overlapping realities that no longer agreed with one another. Holmes stood at the center of it all, utterly still. Lestrade gripped his revolver with trembling fingers. "This is your fault," he said hoarsely. Holmes did not look at him. "No," he replied. "This is its limitation." Crane stepped backward, eyes wide. "It's never done this before." Finch whispered, "What is happening to it?" Holmes finally spoke. "It is encountering contradiction it cannot resolve." As if responding to his words, the machine emitted a low, grinding tone. Not a sound of operation, a sound of distress. The lights embedded throughout the structure flickered violently, then stabilized, then flickered again, this time in irregular patterns. Holmes walked slowly toward the central platform. The system was built on the assumption that human behavior can be reduced to a complete model. He placed a hand lightly on the brass railing. "But I introduced an impossibility." Lestrade frowned. "What impossibility?" Holmes looked at him. "Unpredictable reasoning." Crane shook his head. "That should not matter. The system accounts for deviation." Holmes nodded. "Yes, deviation." He turned back toward the machine. Not refusal. A deeper vibration surged through the chamber. Several of the overhead clock arrays began to spin in opposite directions. Finch stumbled slightly. "It's accelerating again." Holmes corrected him calmly. "No, it is fragmenting." The projection above us collapsed entirely for a moment, then reformed, but differently. Now it showed not Holmes but countless versions of him speaking different conclusions simultaneously. Lestrade shouted, "Stop this thing!" Holmes did not move. "It cannot be stopped by force now." "Then how?" Holmes hesitated. For the first time since we entered this place, there was no immediate answer. Instead, he studied the core, the glowing heart of the machine. Then he said quietly, "There is only one remaining control principle." Crane looked alarmed. "What principle?" Holmes answered, "Origin." The machine reacted instantly. A sharp, metallic shriek echoed through the chamber. The word had triggered something. A buried layer of logic, a final safeguard. Finch stepped back. "What did you do?" Holmes replied. "I identified its dependency." Lestrade frowned. "I don't understand." Holmes turned slightly. "All predictive systems require a fixed reference point." Crane whispered, "Voss." Holmes nodded. "Yes." The machine's core brightened violently. Images flashed across its surfaces, faster now. Not predictions, memories. A man at a workbench, clock gears scattered, ink-stained hands writing equations. Jeremiah Voss, alive, thinking, building. Holmes watched carefully. He did not vanish. Lestrade blinked. "What?" Holmes stepped closer. He transferred himself into the system. Finch froze. "That's impossible." Holmes shook his head. "No." He pointed at the machine. "It explains everything." Crane's voice shook. "He was the first variable." Holmes nodded. "And the final reference point." The machine emitted a sustained tone, long, unbroken, as if acknowledging the truth. Holmes continued. "Voss believed he could model human life, but when he succeeded," he paused, "he could no longer distinguish himself from the model." Silence. Lestrade whispered, "So he became the machine." Holmes replied, "Or the machine became him." The core pulsed again, this time more gently, almost like recognition. Finch stepped forward cautiously. "Then what happens now?" Holmes looked at the central structure. "It attempts correction." Crane shook his head. "It cannot correct itself." Holmes answered softly, "It already has." The machine's lights dimmed suddenly. Every clock froze. Complete silence returned. Even the hum ceased. Lestrade looked around uneasily. "Is it over?" Holmes did not answer immediately. He stepped toward the console, then placed his hand on the dial marked 7. This time, no reaction occurred. He turned it slightly. Still nothing. Finch whispered, "It's dead." Holmes shook his head. "No." He looked at the frozen machine. "It is deciding what to become without prediction." A long silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, a single clock resumed ticking. then another, then another. But not in synchrony, each one independent, each one imperfect. The system was no longer unified. It was breaking into fragments of uncertainty. Lestrade exhaled. So it's over. Holmes stepped down from the platform. Yes. Crane looked confused. Then what did we stop? Holmes paused, then answered, a system that believed certainty was possible. Finch looked down at the slowly dying machine. And now? Holmes turned toward the exit. Now it learns what uncertainty means. A faint rumble echoed behind us. Not destruction, not failure, transformation. Lestrade followed reluctantly. So Voss is gone? Holmes hesitated, then said, no. The inspector frowned. No? Holmes looked back once. At the moment he stopped distinguishing prediction from reality, he ceased to be a man, a pause, and became a possibility. We climbed back through the passage in silence. Above us, London was beginning to wake, fog thinning, dawn returning, normality reasserting itself as if nothing beneath the city had ever existed. But Holmes paused at the surface. He looked back once more toward the hidden entrance, then spoke quietly. The machine is not gone. Lestrade frowned. What do you mean? Holmes replied. It will never be able to fully decide what it is again. He turned away, and neither will we. For a moment, I thought the case had truly ended, but Holmes's expression told me otherwise, because as we stepped into the morning light, he quietly added one final sentence. And that, he said, is precisely how Voss intended it. Epilogue. The man who solved the impossible. It is difficult to describe the morning after such events without resorting to language that feels inadequate. London, as always, continued its existence without acknowledgement of the horrors beneath it. Carriages rattled through streets, shopkeepers opened their doors, newsboys shouted headlines that had nothing to do with machines that modelled human fate beneath Whitechapel. And yet for those of us who had stood inside Jeremiah Voss's creation, the world had irreversibly shifted. Inspector Lestrade departed without ceremony. He left only a single remark before vanishing into the fog. I will never write this in a report. Crane was taken into custody, though even that felt temporary, as if the law itself could not decide what category he belonged to. Finch returned to his workshop in silence. He did not resume repairs for several days, perhaps longer. As for Holmes, he said very little on the journey back to Baker Street. Only once did I break the silence. Holmes? I asked. What was it, in the end? He stood at the window, watching the morning light stretch across the street. A failure, he said simply. A failure? Yes. He turned slightly. Voss attempted to eliminate uncertainty from human life, and instead, Holmes's expression remained unreadable. He created a system that required uncertainty to function. I considered this. Then the murders were corrections, Holmes replied, to stabilize an impossible model. A pause followed. Then I asked the question that had troubled me since the beginning. Was he right? Holmes did not answer immediately. He walked to the fireplace, where the ash from the previous night still lay cold and undisturbed. Then he spoke quietly. That is the wrong question, Watson. Why? Because it assumes the system was about truth. He looked at me. It was about control. Silence settled between us. Outside, London moved on. Inside, something had not. Holmes reached for his violin but did not play. Instead, he placed it back down. I do not believe Voss is gone, he said suddenly. I looked at him. You mean he survived? Holmes shook his head. No. Then what do you mean? He hesitated, then replied, He is distributed. The word unsettled me more than I expected. Distributed? Holmes nodded. In fragments of logic, in systems of inference, in every attempt to predict human behavior with certainty. He looked toward the window again, and in that sense, Watson, he paused. We may encounter him again. I did not respond. Some statements do not invite reply, only contemplation. Later that day, Scotland Yard issued a quiet statement regarding the Whitechapel disturbance, attributing it to an industrial accident and a tragic domestic incident at Lord Bancroft's residence. No mention was made of the underground chamber, no mention of Jeremiah Voss, no mention of a machine that attempted to turn human life into an equation. Such omissions, I have learned, are sometimes the most honest form of reporting. Holmes and I returned to our usual rhythm. Cases resumed, clients arrived. Mysteries presented themselves as though nothing extraordinary had ever occurred. Yet I noticed a change in my companion, subtle but persistent. At times, he would pause mid-observation, as if listening to something that was not there. At others, he would look at me briefly before speaking, as though confirming I was still an independent variable and not part of a larger calculation. One evening, I asked him again, "Do you regret it?" Holmes considered this for a long time. Then he said, "No. Why not?" He finally smiled faintly. "Because for the first time, I solved a case that refused to behave like a case." He rose, crossed to the window, and looked out at the fog-laced street. "And yet it remains unsolved." I frowned. "How so?" Holmes replied quietly, "Because the machine still runs." I started to speak, but he raised a hand. "Not beneath Whitechapel." He turned slightly. "Within thought itself." A silence followed. Then he added, almost absently, "And every time a man believes he can predict another man perfectly." He paused. Voss begins again. Outside, London remained unchanged. But I have often wondered since whether Holmes was right, whether somewhere beneath certainty itself, a clock still ticks, and whether, in rare moments when we believe we understand everything, it is not Holmes who is watching the machine, but the machine that is watching us.